As far as what I do, my job is to represent you. My job is to make sure you receive your full indemnity, the right amount of money it's going to take to fix your house. And sometimes the carrier, they don't pay what you're necessarily entitled to. So, and that's my job, because I bring in a team of experts. I'll bring in a contractor. I'll bring in an engineer report, and I will make sure that anything you can possibly, be worked into your claim is going to happen.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Story of You. We have a special guest with us today, Nick Faldetta from Premier Claims. Nick is a public adjuster. Nick, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what you do as a public adjuster.
Well, it's great thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Very honored. So for those who don't know what a public adjuster is, we're kind of an intermediary between dealing with your insurance carrier and not having to go through the process of hiring a lawyer necessarily. It's actually why the PA profession was originally created. A lot of people don't know, because back in the day, the courts were so backlogged with people suing their insurance company, they created a separate license and profession, and that's where the public adjuster was born. So what we do is we represent homeowners or those who own businesses, if it's a commercial claim, in a dispute with their insurance company for full indemnity. So let's say, to give you an example, let's say your house has a fire and the insurance company sends their adjuster and they say, oh, it's only worth $10,000. But, it probably is worth a lot more than that. You can take the step of hiring a public adjuster, and I'll come in and I'll bring in experts from a general contractor, an engineer report if I need it, et cetera, and we'll get you the full amount. And it doesn't cost you anything, except at the very end, we just take usually a percentage in most states of whatever we get you, usually like in the 10% range, something like that. So that's what a public adjuster does in summary. We represent the homeowners and business owners in disputes with their insurance company, make sure they get the full amount of money.
Excellent. Well, that was a very good description. Do you come across people when you tell them you're a public adjuster who say, what is that?
Absolutely, all the time, including some people, friends of mine, even in the past, who didn't realize that was even a real thing. One of my, I'll give you an example, even one of my friends from a previous job many years ago, he had just purchased a home, and I was in the process of getting my license still. And I was like, well, if you ever have an issue, I should be licensed by the time you own the house, give me a call, And it took me like a half hour to explain that what I do was legitimate and I have a license from the state. He was like, but I have insurance. Like, what do you mean you fight the insurance company? I was like, well, if you have a dispute, like if you don't think you got the right amount of money, my license allows me to get you the full amount of money. Very simple. And he just wasn't getting it. But yeah, unfortunately, that is an issue. I think it's not too bad in Florida because of all the hurricanes we've had. So a lot of people, particularly in South Florida, like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, are very familiar with the public adjusting process, but in a lot of other places, they really aren't.
Sure. And that your story of your friend reminds me that I've heard that friends and family tend to be our worst clients because they don't see us in that professional role. They see us as, their friend or their family member. So it's hard for them sometimes to see us in our professional role. So were you able to help your friend out in that case?
Well, he never had a claim, so I didn't get the chance, although I have helped a couple of my friends with insurance claims, actually. So
sure. So then let's talk a little bit about your background. Tell me about, did you do sports when you were younger?
Yes, I was a baseball player.
Okay. Did you have any notable moments as a baseball player?
I did, actually. It's funny too, because which is kind of interesting in the arc of my life. It almost transpired in my childhood too, because I wasn't the best player on the team by any means, nothing like that. In fact, I probably was on the lower end on the team, but I always worked very hard, and my coaches and everyone always encouraged me because of that. And then I remember we actually got to the championship game in our league because my team overall was very good. And we were losing by three runs, and bases were loaded. There's 2 outs, quite literally. I mean, this is not a lie, or, this is a true story. And I came up, and I hadn't had a hit this whole series because we were playing our 3-game championship, like Little League World Series, basically. And it's a 2-1 count, and I'm facing like the hot shot pitcher in the county at the time, amongst all the 12 and 13-year-old kids. And I happened to just make a connection, and I hit the ball, and bases cleared, inside the park, home run, and I won the championship for the team. It was really probably the highlight of my childhood. They were picking me up, like, lifting me up and like hollering. It was great.
Yeah. So did you instantly gain popularity among the other players and at school? Did it reach that far?
The rest of that summer, there was definitely like, people knew who I was within the local Little League community, for whatever that's worth.
That's cool. That's cool. So how long did you end up playing baseball?
And about till the middle of high school. I'd suffered a couple little injuries, nothing major. And then I also had some discrepancies with like coaches, and the truth is I didn't want to play ball in college. So I kind of middle of high school, I was like, well, I'd rather just focus on school and my academics and stuff. So that's about when I stopped, like 10th grade.
Very good. And where'd you grow up?
So I'm originally from Fort Lauderdale. My family's originally from New York City. A lot of people don't know this about South Florida, but it's basically New York's 6th borough. So I always say I'm a New Yorker, but I'm from Florida. So I grew up there. And then when I was in high school, we moved to the West Coast of Florida. So I spent most of my high school years in a town called Punta Gorda, Florida. It's kind of this little nestled harbor town right in between Fort Myers and Sarasota.
Okay. And where are you now?
St. Petersburg, Florida.
Nice. I went to Stetson Law School in St. Petersburg, Florida. So
wonderful.
I'm very familiar with the area.
Yeah, it's a great town.
Yeah. So what'd you do after high school?
After high school, I did my first round of college. I had dropped out about a year and a half in before my associates was finished. It's kind of like a weird time in my life. I think it is for a lot of people, 19, 20 years old. You're kind of like, I wasn't sure what I really wanted to study. I had some personal issues, and I was just kind of floundering. And I got a job. I got a minimum wage, like sort of like retail job. So I don't know, I had this weird mindset where I was like, oh, I just want to save money so I can move out and move somewhere else. But in hindsight, that wasn't the smartest thing. But at the same time, that's kind of what I did those couple of years until I sort of got my act together and I finished school and everything.
Sure. And did you end up going back to finish your associate's degree?
Yes.
Excellent. And what'd you do after that, after getting your degree?
So after that, I actually got my regular insurance adjuster's license. I kind of worked on that in the midst of this, but I didn't really get a chance to exercise it quite yet. I was working for a production company in Orlando through my brother, who is in that business. And so that was an interesting experience. I did that for like 2.5 years.
So what do you mean by production company? What kind of production did you work on?
Live events, a lot of corporate stuff. I'd say most of it was corporate events, which was kind of interesting. We handled, the company I worked for did the live event and trade shows for companies like Ernst & Young, Visa credit card, a lot of big corporations. And then we also did entertainment, mostly concerts. Got to do a Snoop Dogg concert once, and Walk the Moon, Ty Dolla $ign, for those who maybe like rap more than I do. He almost knocked over my camera that I was operating. $500,000 camera that was rented. He almost broke
Ugh.
because he decides to hop on the platform during the middle of a concert. So that was
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. I bet that was your life flashed before your eyes when you thought
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I'm operating this thing. He hops on my stage or platform, whatever you want to call it, and this thing starts to tip, and I'm like, ah. And
Oh
he
no.
has like no regard as to what's going on, and I'm just like, oh my god, you're gonna blame me if this thing breaks.
Yeah, but you recovered it okay?
I recovered it, thankfully. We didn't need to file an insurance claim.
Yes, that might have been your first exposure to insurance claims.
Oh, definitely.
That's awesome. Well, that sounds like a really interesting job getting to work in live events and to get to participate in some of those really reputable concerts. That must have been a fun time in your life.
Yeah, it was. It was a great experience. A little tiring during busy seasons. Sometimes you'd go some time without sleeping, but I think it was a good experience for me. I learned a lot about the world and a lot about myself during that time. And I have some just great stories and memories from that time. So
Awesome. So then you came back then to the less exciting world of insurance. What brought you back?
well, COVID kind of did away with live events in March of 2020. So I decided, well, I'm going to go back home for a while and try to not, spend money on rent and all that stuff since I don't even really have a job anymore. I had my insurance adjuster's license. So it was at that point I was like, well, okay, that's not, once COVID kind of like by the middle of that summer, towards the end of summer 2020 had, people were starting to kind of do things a little bit more normal. I was like, well, let me try to pursue work in this field since I haven't been doing anything for a few months. And that's when I ended up going to work for an independent adjusting firm called Crawford and Company.
And what's an independent adjusting firm?
So regular insurance carriers, of course, have their adjusters who work directly for them. And when there's a loss, they try to use their adjusters, of course, but especially in the event of a catastrophe somewhere like a hurricane or wildfire, stuff like that, they don't have enough adjusters that work at said specific company. So they'll hire an independent adjusting firm that provides adjusters, and they'll work for multiple carriers on the carrier side. So, and that's what I did for about a year.
Okay. So you've been on both sides of the claim then. You've worked for the insurance companies and now you work on behalf of the insured. Is that
Yep,
right?
that's correct.
And do you find that your experience having worked for the insurance companies is useful to you now working on the other side?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it was very useful, especially because you kind of know like how they approach it, and maybe where obviously as a public adjuster, my job now is to try to get and insure the most amount of money that I can. So I kind of have an idea since I worked for the carrier side at one time, like, generally where they try to maybe not pay as much, or where, kind of, I don't want to use the term cutting corners, but kind of like how they operate. It definitely helps. Kind of like lawyers do. A lot of the best defense attorneys start out as prosecutors, don't they?
Yes. And vice versa. I worked for the insurance companies like you when I first started for almost 10 years. So
Oh,
it
wow,
was
a lot longer than me.
very, very valuable experience though, for me as well to work on that side of things. So do you have a particular success story that stands out to you that was memorable and meaningful to you when you help someone?
Yeah, I do. And actually, ironically, it's funny you bring this up because you asked me before if I helped that one friend who didn't know what I really understood what I did. It wasn't him, but it was a different friend.
Okay.
His mom's house had a water loss, a pipe break. And, they didn't have a lot of money and they didn't really understand the whole insurance process. But we were able, or I was able, specifically in that case to kind of say, hey, like, you just had this loss and I can help you. And and it took some convincing because again, they weren't 100% sold or understanding. I was like, no, I represent you. I can get you the money because they probably won't give you enough, or at least what you think or you're entitled to. And that really was a success story because, we got whole brand new kitchen, whole new floor, everything was continuous, which in Florida, as far as insurance coverages go, if it's all painted the same color, it's all got a match in the whole house, and, same with the floors. So we were able to get him a lot more than they originally offered him. And his, not only did it help them fix their house, I think it really helped them personally.
Absolutely. And that must feel wonderful to be able to help someone, to be able to make the repairs. Our home is our biggest investment most of the time. So if something's wrong with it, that can be a major stressor. And to be able to, have the money available through insurance to pay for those repairs is, I'm sure, just such a relief for the clients you help.
It really is. I'd say it's definitely the most rewarding part of my job, is because you really are helping people. It's not, I'm not here to take something from them. I'm not charging them $1,000 an hour or something crazy. It's like, we're really here providing a service that most of the time they don't even realize they need. But when that time comes, if you have a fire or there's a hurricane, your roof's gone, I mean, you really do need someone who is on your side.
Sure. Absolutely. So if you were to speak to a homeowner who was contemplating whether to use the services of a public adjuster or go it alone, what would you say to them?
Generally, what I would say, kind of what I always lead with, is I explain what a public adjuster is, kind of like what I already told you. I even go into the history, like, the public adjusting profession was created to keep things out of the courts. We're an intermediary step. I have a license from the state. This is my license number, et cetera, et cetera. As far as what I do, my job is to represent you. My job is to make sure you receive your full indemnity, the right amount of money it's going to take to fix your house. And sometimes the carrier, they don't pay what you're necessarily entitled to. Or sometimes, maybe, especially when we're using an independent adjuster like I used to be, I was pretty new when I did that and somewhat amateur. Sometimes they don't really know what to look for. And so it's not that they're trying to give you less money, but their estimate maybe just won't be worth as much because they didn't realize, oh, we have to do all of this to replace the roof, So, and that's my job, because I bring in a team of experts. I'll bring in a contractor. I'll bring in an engineer report. And I will make sure that anything you can possibly, be worked into your claim is going to happen. And that's what I do.
Excellent. So if there's a homeowner who's been approached by a few different public adjusting companies, is there anything that you do differently or that sets you apart that you would share with that homeowner?
Yes. I think the biggest thing, of course, is because obviously we don't work for free. Unfortunately, in Florida, you can't charge more than 20%, but even then I usually don't negotiate contracts for quite that high. In some states, unfortunately, there is no cap. So, and I think some people maybe have a bad experience with public adjusters in that respect, because maybe they've been hit with like 50% of their 50% bill and whatnot. So I definitely try to stray away from that. That's always one big sticking point for me is, look, I'm not, this is the maximum we're allowed to charge, and I'm not even doing that. I'm giving you like half of that value. And then the main thing that I think separates me from other people, to answer your question, is I try to be as personal as possible. I don't come from a sales background. Like, some people, I think, in a lot of professions, because sales is obviously like maybe the biggest profession in this country, they approach things from like a salesman-y sort of like, quick word buzzwords, trying to get you to go along with it. And they may be very convincing in that regard, but then it's kind of like a hollow relationship. There isn't much foundation there. I don't come from a sales background. I'm very good at leveling with people and educating people. And I think that I'm good at forming personal relationships. So the way I try to separate myself from maybe some of those other public adjusters is I always update the client, usually by telephone, even if there's nothing to tell them, really. Even if it's like the claim is just kind of working through its process and the carrier is still waiting to send out their adjuster or waiting for an engineer report, I'll tell them that. I call them every, 2 weeks or whatever and be like, hey, nothing really changed this week. Just wanted to let we're going through the process. Everything's still, just takes time. You just touch base with them, and people appreciate that. That's really what I think separates me from others, personal relationships.
So it sounds like you really value your customers as people and relationships more than just, someone who's hired you to perform a service.
Absolutely. And again, kind of like what you said, I mean, for most homeowners, it's the biggest and maybe the only true investment they're ever really going to have. So they're already very emotional, especially if, God forbid, it's something really bad like a fire, because not only is the house damaged and maybe they can't live there right now, or they're living in, have to live in one section of the house away from the damage, but they could have personal items that may be burnt down, like pictures and family heirloom stuff. So I think it's very important to, have a lot of empathy with them and be patient and explain to them. I always find education, people are more anxious when they don't understand something. I mean, even I'm like that. So the more I can explain the process to them and keep reassuring them, like, it's going to be okay. This is the process. This is what I do. They're usually very responsive to that.
Sure. You've mentioned a couple of times other states. Do you do any work outside of Florida, or is Florida really your area of specialty?
I'm only licensed in Florida. The company I work for is licensed, I'm pretty sure, in all 50 states. Don't 100% quote me if there's like one state that they aren't, and then somebody wants to say, but in most of the country, Premier Claims handles claims where public adjusters are allowed. I know in a couple of states, I think public adjusters are not allowed. I believe Alabama's one of them. I think only appraisers are allowed there, if I remember correctly. Again, don't quote me. Disclaimer: I'm not a lawyer, so.
Sure, but most of the country, it seems like.
Yeah.
Okay, and so outside of work, what kind of things do you like to do? Do you have any hobbies?
Yeah, I don't know if this constitutes a hobby or not, but I'm a big history buff. So usually if I'm not working, or I do exercise a lot, I try to stay healthy. So maybe that's a hobby, going to the gym, but I'm big into history and politics, all that stuff. So I'm usually watching a documentary or reading a book. That's what I do in my spare time. My video game days are definitely long behind me. I think I gave that up in high school.
So what's a good documentary or book that you've seen lately?
So one of my favorite resources is documentary wise is there's a channel on YouTube called Kings and Generals. They focus a lot on like war history, but they touch everything from World War II to, the ancient world, like stuff with the Greeks and Romans. So I've watched a bunch of stuff from them. I watched one the other night. Most people aren't going to know what this is. It was about the Anglo-Zulu War in South Africa in the 1800s.
Yep, I don't know what that is.
There you go. That's how deep I am into this profession or hobby, whatever you want to call it. And then I recently read a book by a professor named Yuval Harari called Sapiens. It's kind of like an entire history of the human species, and also like where we came from, where we are, where we're going. That was a very good book. I highly recommend that too.
Have you always been interested in history, or is it something that evolved over time?
It started my interest, I'd say always, because I remember kind of when it started, it was like in the first grade. I had a teacher who I think she must have liked it because she taught it very well, like better than, obviously when you're elementary school, you have a teacher who she teaches everything. So she's
Right.
your teacher, she's your English teacher, etc. But she taught us a lot of history, and I mean, like detailed stuff, like really looking back on it, like all about the conquistadors and like the Mayan Indians in Central America and all kinds of stuff. Looking at it as an adult, I was like, that was pretty detailed for the first grade. I think that was more detailed than some of the stuff I got in high school and college.
Yeah, well, it must have really had an impact, because I can't remember a single thing I learned in first grade. So
yeah, like it definitely did, and
Yeah.
it really piqued my interest. And ever since, even when I was a little kid, I was watching the History Channel. I think I gave up Disney Channel when I was like 9 or 10, and I started watching Discovery Channel and History Channel. I was more fascinated by that.
Wow. That's interesting. So what do you do with all this knowledge that you have of history?
Mostly just bore my friends.
You have some great pickup lines for the ladies with the history facts.
Some women have said they like men who know random World War II facts. So I guess that, there's a market for me somewhere, right?
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Well, it's admirable to me. I mean, that's not a field that I have ever really dug into, but just listening to you speak, it is very interesting and admirable that you spend your time really educating yourself as opposed to entertaining yourself like most people do. So that says a lot, I think, about your quality of character, but also your work ethic, that you, when you have free time, you spend it bettering yourself and educating yourself. And I think that says a lot about you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'd say that's true too. I'm big on always bettering yourself, because if you're unhappy with your life or, your situation, or only you can really make yourself happy. It's really all comes down to you. You can't really rely on other people. So the more you can educate yourself, make yourself, more physically able to do things, usually life becomes a little bit easier to deal with.
Sure. And so if someone was interested in speaking to an insurance claim, how would they get a hold of you?
They could reach me at my email. For my email for my company, it's N Faldetta. So it's my first initial, my last name, at premier-claims.com. My personal email is nikkijames@comcast.net. And then they could always reach me by telephone. Is it okay if I give my telephone?
Yeah, of course.
Sure. My office line is, what is my office line? I forgot my office line. I give you my personal line. It's 954-232-5723. I can provide my office line later. Of course, my mind is going blank. This is a funny thing I was going to say before. I am a little bit like Dory. So I can remember obscure historical war facts from some specific battle in 1942, but I will leave my sunglasses at places, forget my keys when I'm walking to my car.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
I can
you have good long-term memory.
Yeah, I can memorize things in an insurance policy, but then, my cell phone gets left on a bar in New York City.
Do you memorize phone numbers? Do you know people's phone numbers, or do you have to look them up?
The phone numbers I have to look up.
Yeah, same. Well, so where do you see this all taking you over the next few years?
My hope is, I can help as many people as I can and be as financially successful as I possibly can. Eventually own my own house, maybe eventually get to a point where my personal life, I have my own family, stuff like that. So kind of the same thing I think most people deep down really want. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, with what I've heard from you today, I have no doubt you are already well on your way to accomplishing those goals. So I wish you the best. And I thank you so much for spending your time with me this afternoon. And do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Just on a personal level for people, like, if you're not really sure where you are in life, this is a great profession to be in. You really help people. And it's good to get to work with people in a positive role. And, just whatever you're doing, just keep working, because eventually it'll pay off.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's great advice. Well, that is it for today. Thank you again for your time and for being here. I will go ahead and sign off now.
Great. Thanks, Brooke. Appreciate it.